The more specific of an ask we made, the more likely it was that someone would respond. If we just said, hey, become a contributor, share your story, well, that means a lot of different things to different people. When we said, write a thank you letter to someone who's helped you on your health journey, boom, everybody knows how to do that.
Chris, what's up, man? How you doing today?
Doing great, Sam. It's raining here in Brooklyn. How's it going out in Jackson Hole?
It's we're literally in the clouds, bro. It's like
nice.
I usually can look out and see mountains, and today I just see clouds, which is it's eerily like calming. I like it.
Silent hill vibes.
Yeah, for sure. With that said, very excited for our guest today, Mr. Mike Porath. He is the CEO of The Mighty, which is the world's largest health community online. The way I kind of like to think about it is they've essentially built a community platform that operates similar to Facebook groups, but for different health topics and subtopics. Their stories and videos are viewed and shared more than 90 million times a month. And I think what's really fascinating to me is that when they started The Mighty, it actually started as a publisher, but as they continued to get more engagement and as he was scratching the own itch in helping his family deal and overcome with various health issues, he saw the need for community and creating this really sense of a supportive environment for people to help each other. So he really pivoted the platform from a more traditional media company and publisher into this very community-centric digital product. So really interesting to hear his approach on building these massive communities. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, pretty interesting stuff. I think building the community is one thing. Really driving that engagement is a total other thing, especially when you're calling on a bunch of contributors. So he outlined some really interesting ways of how even gamification can be folded in to make sure that people are engaging. Having very targeted, specific requests to the community as opposed to just kind of like broad asks and broad call to actions, I think is really interesting as well. And he dives into brand partnerships. So it sounds like he's done a lot to build the community there through brand-to-brand partnerships as well. So breaking down some of those concepts is quite fascinating, I think.
For sure. Well, he definitely knows how to balance and walk the walk and talk the talk. I think he does a good mix of tactics as well as high-level commentary and some just general trends as far as how brands and media companies will continue to evolve. So without any further ado, let's get into this week's episode. Mike, what's happening, man? How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Sam. How you doing?
Cannot complain. Very excited to have you on the show. I think the community you've been able to build is very impressive, and I think it's literally changed people's lives for the better. With that said, I mean, could you just lay a little bit of context about The Mighty, what exactly the product and company is, and how it's kind of evolved over the years?
Sure. It's The Mighty is the world's leading health community. We've got 3 million members, and it's really designed for folks to share their experiences with each other. And I really believe in the power of those shared experiences. There's so much wisdom and knowledge that people can share to help each other out, no matter what kind of health condition they're facing. We started more as a publisher. I started it, kind of bootstrapped it 6 years ago, just doing 3 stories a day, and then trying to find, areas where we could get stories from people in the community dealing with health issues in front of other people, that were there, and it just took off and grew over time. So we've published now 50,000 stories, and these are generally first-person stories from people with a health condition, and less about the medical side and more about just the human side, the emotional side of what they're going through, what they're dealing with. And those stories, people find through Google and Facebook and everywhere else on the internet. And a small portion of those people then sign up to become members of the community. And again, we started as a publisher, then really evolved into much more of a community platform, social network, where people can, kind of post openly thoughts, questions, all of that, to others, form groups, those types of things. And so, again, we started as a publisher, really evolved into much more of a community platform over time.
That's amazing, and very curious too, because I'm sure you were getting some engagement from the audience and that they were longing for more engagement and more community. So I guess this kind of next question is diving into that, because I know oftentimes when people are trying to start communities and engage communities and really let people engage with each other, it can be a bit challenging to get those first dominoes to fall. And I think in your experience, I mean, the first dominoes have clearly fallen and it has only continued to snowball from there. But could you speak a little bit to some of the how you were able to get and generate some of that initial engagement that laid the foundation and for continued growth?
Sure. So, my background is as a journalist. I spent most of my career at ABC News, NBC News, and the New York Times. So I'm a content guy. It just, that's kind of my heart and soul. And I started this community, the Mighty, because I have a daughter. I have 4 kids, but I have a daughter who has a rare disease. She's autistic, has all kinds of challenges. And what my wife and I found was that we got the most help by connecting with other people. And so that was really the impetus for all of this. And the thing that struck me the very first day she got diagnosed, and I go, searching on Google for like Dup15q syndrome, like what is this, right? And the medical stuff was not helpful to me. The thing that was most helpful was I found an old PDF file that had 6 stories from parents of kids with these, with this, rare disease. And what struck me as a journalist is like these stories were so powerful, right? And it wasn't because they were amazing writers. It was because like I was on the same journey that they were on now. I just learned that I was on that journey. And the notion I had was like, I wanted to, reach out to them and like grab a beer, right? And like listen and understand more. But the network, wasn't really there. And what struck me about that is there were a lot of health communities out there, but it was more of like just like a message board. And what pulled me in were real stories from real people. Right. And like that was so powerful to me. And so I started to look at it as what stories really do is they start conversations. Right. And I'm not just talking about the health on health or the Mighty, just in general in our lives. Like stories start conversations. You get together with your friends and that's how things flow. And then those conversations can kind of start forming communities. Who wants to participate in those conversations? And that's true of, I'm a Dodgers fan. I'm glad to see them win the World Series. I can talk with other Dodgers fans around, something like that. So it's not just health, but that arc of stories leading to conversations, leading to community, I really believe in. And so when we started the Mighty, we thought the gap in, web content around healthcare was there weren't many first person stories out there that were all kind of collected in one place. And so I think the key insight we had really early on was, this isn't about building the greatest technology and just coming up with the right features. It was really getting into human stories of how people were experiencing health conditions and letting that, kind of drive, those would get shared. They'd find other people would grab onto them. And that was the right vehicle to start this community. And again, I mean, every community starts in a different time and place, and there's different tactics and different platforms and all those things to build on. Facebook was very helpful to us early on. It's not a key part of what we do now, but 5-6 years ago, it was a great place for us to kind of start building the community. And then we were ending up really porting so many of those people over into our own platform once we built that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that you bring up a good point, especially with your journalism background and content creator mindset. So often producing content can feel very much like a push strategy, and you can't really force people to engage around content specifically. I'm curious, like, what were some of the ways early on that you kind of helped? Maybe you didn't, but what were some of the ways that you helped encourage people to engage with that content? And also in terms of Facebook no longer being like the primary source, where are you kind of finding those community engagement community member to community member strategies growing the most right now?
I think to answer the first part of your question, when we would publish someone's story, at the end, we would like encourage someone who's reading it to share their own story as well. And what we learned was, because we have about 13,000 writers now who frequently write about their own experiences across, about 1,000 different health conditions. And the way we got, the first, second, third, fourth was reaching out and seeing someone's blog and saying, hey, this is who we are. This is what we're doing. Can we actually, we love the story that you wrote. Can we basically put it on our platform? Right. And I think the first 100 people we asked all said yes. They were like happy to have their voice, their story, on there. And then over time, as more people started reading that content, we were putting links in to encouraging people to share their own to us to really up the, submissions. We found, though, that the more specific of an ask we made, the more likely it was that someone would respond. So, for instance, like the key insight we had was, if we just said, hey, become a contributor, share your story here. Well, that means a lot of different things to different people, share your story. When we said, write a thank you letter to someone who's helped you on your health journey. like, boom, everybody knows how to do that, right? Like it's a really simple request. And we had like 10x the submissions around a request like that. So the more specific that we are around that, the better. And now we send out monthly challenges where our writers want to know, like, well, what do you want me to write about? So we kind of come up with themes and ideas and things that we think, we look at the data to see what kind of content people are reading and all that. And that's really helped us, kind of shape that content engine that gets all of it going. And then after that, it was really building a community platform, which means handing over the tools, right? Essentially to everybody and saying, hey, you guys want to be really engaged in this. Let's just give you the tools to be able to, to go do it. But like the, lead gen kind of operation for us was about this, content machine that we built through, people being willing to share their own experiences, and you have to reward them in different ways. For us, it wasn't payment. It was, we wrote thank you letters to, handwritten thank you letter to everyone whose story, that we published. We felt like, that's actually a nicer way of saying like, this really matters to us in a, human heartfelt way than, a $20 gift card or something. It was just like, hey, like, we really appreciate what you have, done here, your experiences, and thank you for, sharing with with our community. And that bred a lot of loyalty, I think. And so, but we, like anybody else, like we found our way here. We made a lot of mistakes along the way as well.
No, that part well. With that said, I mean, I love everything you just said, especially the point with regards to challenges and using focused ways to make it easier for people to engage and share their perspectives. I think, big questions can definitely be more intimidating to the point of no engagement rather than smaller, easier questions that people can engage and respond with. You mentioned kind of doing monthly challenges. Could you dive a little bit deeper into some of the, like how that works and what some of the most successful challenges have been historically? I think that's a really unique way to go about kind of, when I think about community engagement, you have the community engaging with other members in the community, and then you have you guys kind of initiate engagement between the brand and the community. So that seems really compelling. If you could dive deeper there into some of the most successful ones, that'd be great.
Yeah, we discovered, we initially we waited for content to come in, and then we got to know a lot of the writers, just through email and all that. And they, some of them started asking like, hey, like, so I've been writing for you guys for 6 months and like, I love doing all this, but like, I'm kind of out of ideas. Right. And so then we would go and we would look for, okay, well, pick a topic, parents of kids with autism, like what is the content that is really performing well across the internet, across social networks? And there's tools you can use, to kind of, dive into that. So we could actually look up and say, hey, here are the top 10 most shared stories, not just from the Mighty, but from anywhere around the web, around, these different areas. So we started looking at what's driving conversation around the web, along with like, the topic is generally the health condition. And then it was, what are the experiences people are having that's, that are framed in these stories. And so, we had a level of data that an individual would never have. So that helped us kind of frame questions. And so in a way we were saying like, here's a topic. It wasn't as simple as like fill in the blank with your own experience, but it was like, hey, there's a lot of conversation on the web around these types of, things. And so, around this health condition, do you have any experiences that may fit, into here? And that would just spark ideas, for the writers. But it got to a point where like, if we didn't send out that list of challenges, first, second day of the month, we'd start getting inundated with emails being like, hey, did I miss it? Or, did I get the, did you send out the email with the challenges? Like people were really looking for it because they wanted, ideas. And in terms of, the more successful ones, they're really, they're about moments more so than, like if you ask someone to talk about their experience around something, they may start like way early on their journey, right? And tell you where they went to college and all those things. And people have short attention spans now. So what we try to get them to do is really figure out what are the most interesting, emotional, milestone type moments that they've experienced with their health journey, kind of nail those down and like make their stories about those because they're poignant, they're, specific. And so it was less about an individual idea and more about formats that we could that we could shape, kind of health experiences in that were, that drew a lot of other folks in. And so that was a learning experience, for us as well, trying to figure out like, what are the elements of the story that help it perform well? And the single most important one was, have we really narrowed down to a moment? And because they speak to so many others who have had those moments as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And, the concept around it, so it's almost a lot like gamification to a certain extent, where you're really encouraging that level of engagement and contribution. From your side of the ball, there's obviously, from a content conversation perspective, there's obviously going to be things that, just need to exist on a cycle, right? So like every single year, you're going to want to maybe talk about this or like encourage people to refresh stories around this. Do you find yourselves like building a balance between like, just totally new challenges versus refreshing some older ones? And like, how do you find that balance? And, how do you move forward with that?
Yeah, I think different formats, different kind of content works well on different platforms. Like a headline that'll work well on Facebook probably won't work as well on Pinterest, and vice versa, right? So I think we just continue to learn and work with the community on it. I think what's interesting about that question is, so a lot of our content, I'd say, is evergreen. And so it's whether it was written yesterday or 2 years ago, it's still really pertinent in terms of the experience somebody else had that may be relevant to your own. And so one of the ways we've looked at it is, what are all the distribution vehicles, right, to get it to, folks around the internet? And email has been massive for us. Like I'd say, so early on, we really relied on Facebook. The first year, I'd say it's probably 95% of the views of our content came from Facebook. Now we actually get more through email. And so we send out, I think it's between 25 and 30 million emails a month that people sign up for. And that's a great way to, engage folks, because we can recycle a lot of the content that some story may have performed really well a year ago, but this reader who signed up 6 months ago never would have seen it, right? So we can find high performing stories and put them in emails. And a lot of the folks that care about that, that topic or are interested in that story, they didn't necessarily see it when it was viral on Facebook or getting, found through Google or something like that. So email has been a great distribution, technique, for us.
That's amazing. Yeah, the email seems to be kind of like top of mind for a lot of brands these days, and even text message. I don't know if you're using that vehicle at all either, but that's obviously pretty powerful too. You mentioned pulling data from a number of publishers across the web, and it made me think about brand partnerships and how you might be partnering with other publishers or other brands in terms of collating community through overlap. Mm-hmm. What are some of the approaches that you're taking through that lens? And, if you are taking that approach, would love to hear about that.
Yeah, partnerships have been key to our growth without question. And I think the simplest way we can just look at them, and I would encourage others to look at partnerships, is like, what's the value exchange, on both sides? It's so easy to be like, oh, I want traffic, right? So who do I find that's going to give me traffic? But really, if you have an honest conversation with a potential partner, like, what do we have that you want? And what do they have that I want, right? And how both sides can benefit. And so most of our partners involve like no revenue, no cost. It's more of like, what can they get out of, we're typically now the larger side of those, kind of exchanges, those partnerships. And so it's a matter of like, it's generally something like, well, a nonprofit wants their resources seen, right? They put all this time and energy into their resources, but like nobody goes to their website. And so we're like, wow, we get hundreds of thousands of views on this topic. We could actually take those resources that we don't have to build out, right? But they're really valuable to folks, and get them inside our stories. And we might ask them saying, hey, we would love more of the people in your community to write content for us. Like, we would want to learn their experiences. So on their end, they may be sharing our stories and asking people to submit stories to us. And on our side, we're providing their resources to a whole lot more people, driving awareness around their organization. That's just one example. But if you start the conversation around a partnership on what's the value that, that you really want to get out of it on both sides? I think those conversations generally find their way to something that's going to work, on both ends. So that's where we try to start. We work with dozens of media companies, hundreds of nonprofit organizations. Our business model is built around both like a content marketing or advertising side, as well as what's growing very quickly is kind of a research and insights side. We didn't know when we started this that we were building this enormous database of how people actually experience health. So we don't sell any personal information or anything like that, but we can aggregate large data sets, like thousands of posts around a particular topic, run machine learning against those, and really gain some interesting insights about how people are experiencing things and what emotions are tied together or different health conditions people may have, those types of things. So, but going back to partnerships, I think it's the best place to start is what's the value both sides of a partner are getting out of it. And if you can come up with good answers there, you can build some really strong partnerships.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that. In that same vein too, I mean, as we kind of are nearing towards the end of this, one question I have is, you started as a publisher and very much iterated into, to some extent, now it's very community driven and not necessarily publishing content driven. Do you see that as a trend in the coming years for media companies in general and for other publishers?
I would hope so. I think it's, the challenge that a lot of media companies have, and I worked in media a long time, and in some ways I'm a media skeptic because I know how hard businesses are. And I think that for a long time it was about, can you get eyeballs, right? Can you get, readers to a story, and then you're running boxes and banners of advertising and monetizing that way. And that model, if not dead, is close to dead, right? It's certainly on its way out. And I think what's far more, much better models are more of a membership model versus a kind of viewership model. So a membership model is more of like, how do you actually engage people and get them to come back? Being a passive reader isn't enough. You want people to take action, right? And if you want that, then you've got to give them something to do. You've got to introduce them to the people that they may care about. And so I think that the impact on a member, right, of any kind of community, you need to have something there, because we all go to websites like once a month and never go back, right? And so that someone may count us as an eyeball, that they, hey, this person visited the site, but if we're not participating, if we're not engaging, we're not really worth that much to them, and they're not really worth that much to us. But if you find places that you go back to, weekly, daily, you interact, you meet people, you have discussions, it's far more meaningful to you, and you are far more meaningful to that community or that brand. And so I do think we're moving into a model where it's higher levels of engagement rather than just reading a piece of content. And when you get that as a company or organization, there are different types of ways you can monetize that, whether it's through subscriptions, whether it's through e-commerce. I mean, you're building trust and loyalty and all those things. And there's a lot you can do with it that you can't do with just a flyby reader.
Yeah, no, I think it's so valuable. And I think as attention spans continue to decrease, it only becomes more and more valuable. And I think, yeah, like you said too, you're not going to necessarily be able to, there's only so far you can go within pushing out more content when it comes to really building community and engagement.
Yeah.
With that said, last kind of question here is a question we like to ask all our guests. It definitely will put you on the spot a little bit, but if you were starting a new direct-to-consumer product company from scratch, for starters, what would the product be? And then how would you deploy a $100K marketing budget to jumpstart growth?
It's a great question. I'd look for something that I could build multiple revenue streams off of. So in terms of thinking about a product, it would be something that people care deeply about. I have stuck in my head health because it just matters so much to us, which is, it's kind of I don't know. I feel like I should come up with something other than what we're building here. But the key point is, it's got to be something that people care deeply about, that matters to them, and not a fleeting interest or it wouldn't be cat videos. It'd be the opposite of that, right? It'd be something that people, it really matters to them. And I would build it in a way where I felt like I could monetize it in multiple ways, right? So maybe there's an e-commerce arm to it. Maybe you're getting some kind of insight that's valuable to an industry. There may be an ad component to it, but I wouldn't bet on just one line of monetization. Yeah. And then in terms of a 100K marketing budget, the reality is we don't have a marketing budget here. We built the 3 million members organically through the content. But if I were to do it, I would look for far more around not the cost of the user, but about the retention. It's, getting someone into the funnel and signing up for something is one thing, but you've got to get them to come back. So I wouldn't spend that money until I could see that I was retaining people at a high rate, and then it would make a lot more sense for me to spend that money. So I've kind of worked around your question. I apologize for that, but that's how I think about it.
You did it in excellent form, though. So hats off for sure. Well, really appreciate the time today, Mike. I think all the work you're continuing to do with regards to helping people lead healthier lives and doing it by creating a connected, passionate community. We're grateful for the work you're doing and that you're able to share some wisdom with us today, man. So keep it up.
Thanks very much. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Definitely. Take care. Man, well, that was a great episode. I really enjoyed what Mike had to say. I particularly was drawn to just the general ethos and pivot of the company as a whole from a publisher into this more community-centric product and platform. And then also how they've been able to really kind of jumpstart engagement and really nurture and be strategic as far as how they're able to trigger engagement from the brand's perspective by leaning into these monthly challenges, by asking pointed questions that are a bit easier than the broader, intimidating question, what's your story? So I think those are all very actionable takeaways that I think anybody that's listening to this, that's responsible for marketing anything or trying to sell anything, should really keep in mind and use to inform their strategy. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the gamification thing that you just brought up, I think is really powerful. And I think that what's even more interesting is when they were building the company and building that list of contributors, they were sending handwritten thank you notes, which is just kind of it's a level of personalization that I think a lot of these emerging D2C brands are really taking note of. So I think it's a really good takeaway for a lot of brands and sort of galvanizing community from members as well. And also the value exchange in terms of brand partnerships. That's really powerful to me. We work with a lot of companies that need to actually work with other brands, and figuring out what that community overlap is a really valuable takeaway, because you don't want to just kind of partner with anybody willy-nilly. You really need to figure out how you can aid each other's communities and really strengthen the power of that partnership, and then hopefully over time you can continue to be partners and create a really awesome ecosystem.
1,000%. Well, as always, appreciate you all for tuning in. If you haven't already, we would love if you guys could leave a review wherever you listen to this podcast. It helps us ensure we're hitting on what you care about, and also helps us get this in front of more people. But we care about you the most. So thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week.